Welcome back to Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. The time is 3:53 p.m. on the 12th of July 2025. It's Saturday and Shabbat Shalom, although Shabbat ends at sunset in another couple of hours, I guess. Don't know what time sunset is tonight, but it's impending. It's impending. So another beautiful day has been had in my Sacred Space garden. I've come inside. I've brought both birdies inside because it's bloody cold today. Bloody cold. Although I could have put on long socks and shoes and warmed up that way. But, well, very opulently, I've put the heater on so I can sit here comfortably and finish reading these wonderful stories by W. Somerset Maugham, and we're continuing with the story of Miss King, which part 1 is almost uploaded, and on we go, soldiering on, people of Earth. I've got to have my tea while it's hot because look, cold tea is icky unless it's proper iced tea or peach iced tea, which I'm very partial to. But anyway, so we broke off at the part where he had his bath but got interrupted by knocking at his door, and since he did not want anyone to enter, he had the presence of mind not to say come in, but the knocking was repeated. "Who is it?" he cried irascibly. "A letter." "Come in then. Wait a minute." Ashenden heard his bedroom door open and, getting out of the bath, flung a towel around him and went in. A page boy was waiting for the note. It needed only a verbal answer. It was from a lady staying in the hotel, asking him to play bridge after dinner, and was signed into the continental fashion, Baronne de Higgins. Sounds very opulent to me. Don't think I've ever had a letter from a baronne inviting me to bridge before, but that's really quite a good thing since I don't know how to play bridge. Ashenden, longing for a cosy meal in his own room, in slippers, and with a book, leaned up against a reading lamp, but was about to refuse, when it occurred to him that, in the circumstances, it might be discreet to show himself in the dining room that night. Just put an extra light on. I'm just feeling a bit motley crew and drib and drab and in a dark space. We can't be having that, people of Earth. Just check on what my little boy's doing. Are you eating the sunflower seeds? That was meant for tomorrow. I should have put that away for tomorrow, shouldn't I? Oh, you're going to be a fat little bird with all the sunflower seeds you were having from the mama tea. Yes, she spoils you lavishly, my boy. Can you see him? There he is. Right. It was absurd to suppose that in that hotel the news would not have spread that he had been visited by the police, and it would be as well to prove to his fellow guests that he was not disconcerted. It had passed through his mind that it might be someone in the hotel who had denounced him, and indeed the name of the sprightly Baroness had not failed to suggest itself to him. If it was she who had given him away, there would be a certain humour in playing bridge with her. He gave the boy a message that he would be pleased to come, and proceeded slowly to don his evening clothes. I'd be annoyed if I'd had a really luxurious bath to then have to get up and get dressed and go out again. I reserve my baths for the end of my wild nights of dancing, to unfurl my cramped muscles and just relax. But anyway, the Baroness von Higgins was an Austrian who, on settling in Geneva during the first winter of the war, had found it convenient to make her name look as French as possible. She spoke English and French perfectly. Her surname, so far from Teutonic, she owed to her grandfather, a Yorkshire stable boy who had been taken over to Austria by a Prince Blankenstein early in the 19th century. Well, I'll never. He had had a charming and a romantic career, a very good-looking man. He attracted the attention of one of the archduchesses, and then made such good use of his opportunities that he ended his life as a baron and minister plenipotentiary to an Italian court. Rather impressive for a stable boy, if you ask me. From Yorkshire, a Yorkshire stable boy came up on the down train. Well, bless his little cotton socks. Right. The Baroness, his only descendant after an unhappy marriage, just as I suspected, the particulars of which she was fond of relating to her acquaintance, had resumed her maiden name. She mentioned not infrequently the fact that her grandfather had been an ambassador, but never that he had been a stable boy, and Ashenden had learned this interesting detail from Vienna, for as he grew friendly with her, he had thought it necessary to get a few particulars about her past, and he knew, among other things, that her private income did not permit her to live on the somewhat lavish scale on which she was living in Geneva. Since she had so many advantages for espionage, it was fairly safe to suppose that an alert secret service had enlisted her services, and Ashenden took it for granted that she was engaged somehow on the same kind of work as himself. It increased, if anything, the cordiality of his relations with her. When he went into the dining room, it was already full. He sat down at his table and, feeling jaunty after his adventure, ordered himself, at the expense of the British government, a bottle of champagne. The Baroness gave him a flashing, brilliant smile. She was a woman of more than 40, but in a hard and glittering manner, extremely beautiful. If you're going to be beautiful, my darlings, you might as well be hard and glittering about it. Just saying. Ah, what a way to describe a woman, for the love of all the gods. She was a high-coloured blonde with golden hair of a metallic lustre. Lovely, no doubt, but not attractive, and Ashenden had from the first reflected that it was not the sort of hair you would like to find in your soup, meaning by that it was dyed chemically and unsustainably to the very roots, my darlings. She had fine features, blue eyes, a straight nose, and a pink and white skin. But her skin was stretched over her bones a trifle tightly. She was generously décolletée, and her white and ample bosom had the quality of marble. Sounds rather saucy to me. There was nothing in her appearance to suggest the yielding tenderness that the susceptible find so alluring. She was magnificently gowned, but scantily bejewelled, so that Ashenden, who knew something of these matters, concluded that the superior authority had given her carte blanche at a dressmaker's, but had not thought it prudent or necessary to provide her with rings and pearls. She'll need to remedy that forthwith, won't she, my darlings? She was notwithstanding so showy that, but for our story of the minister, Ashenden would have thought the sight of her alone must have aroused in anyone on whom she desired to exercise her wiles the sense of prudence. While he waited for his dinner to be served, Ashenden cast his eyes over the company. Most of the persons gathered were old friends by sight. At that time, Geneva was a hotbed of intrigue, and its home was the hotel at which Ashenden was staying. There were Frenchmen there, Italians and Russians, Turks, Romanians, Greeks, and Egyptians. Some had fled their country, some doubtless represented it. There was a Bulgarian, an agent of Ashenden, whom, for greater safety— you really love those sunflowers, don't you? By the gods, Cammy. Whom, for greater safety, he had never even spoken to in Geneva. He was dining that night with two fellow countrymen, and in a day or so, if he was not killed in the interval, might have a very interesting communication to make. Just check on the little one. What you doing, boy? Handsome boy. Right, concentrate, Tanya Aarons, concentrate. Then there was a little German prostitute with china blue eyes and a doll-like face, who made frequent journeys along the lake and up to Bern, and in the exercise of her profession got little titbits of information over which doubtless they pondered with deliberation in Berlin. I think they call that pillow talk. She was, of course, of a different class from the Baroness and hunted much easier game. Excuse me, but lippen sticking, smushing from the cup of tea drinking is a huge problem, people there. Oh, there we go. Right, where were we? Oh yes, we got distracted by the little German prostitute, as one does. But Ashendon was surprised to catch sight of Count von Holzminden and wondered what on earth he was doing there. This was the German agent in Vevey, and he came over to Geneva only on occasion. Once Ashendon had seen him in the old quarter of the city, with its silent houses and deserted streets, talking at a corner to a man whose appearance very much suggested the spy, and he would have given a great deal to hear what they said to one another. It had amused him to come across the Count, for in London before the war he had known him fairly well. He was of great family and indeed related to the Hohenzollerns, dear goddess. He was fond of England. He danced well, rode well, and shot well. People said he was more English than the English. He was a tall, thin fellow in well-cut clothes, with a close-cropped Prussian head and that peculiar bend of the body, as though he were just about to bow to royalty, that you feel rather than see in those who have spent their lives about a court. See what he's thumpity-bumping at. What are you thumping down now? All your corn and grapes and vegetables? You're meant to eat them, not thump them down on the floor of your cage like a savage. Mama, I'm entertaining myself while you read. Okay, it's quite reasonable, isn't it? He had charming manners, unlike Kermy, and was much interested in the fine arts. But now Ashendon and he pretended they had never seen one another before. Each, of course, knew on what work the other was engaged, and Ashendon had had a mind to chaff him about it. It seemed absurd when he had dined with a man off and on for years and played cards with him to act as though he did not know him from Adam, but refrained in case the German looked upon his behaviour as further proof of the British frivolity in face of war. Hadn't really thought about the British being frivolous in the face of war. But then, a quick segue, my mother, the war had just ended, I believe, learnt English from a Scotsman in the British Army. He was playing football with his you know, he was an officer, but he was playing football with his men, Fußball, soccer, I believe it's called. And, you know, my mother, very German, like a little German doll walking past, sashaying confidently with great insouciance, knowing her when she was young, because I can only imagine what she was like when she was young, people of Earth, by the gods. Anyway, he'd kicked the ball in her general direction, and she very kindly picked it up and tossed it back, you know, back towards the men, and kept walking, because, you know, German girl, post-war, with allies, dangerous thing, dangerous times for a woman, young woman, so young on her own. Very dangerous times, I might add. Anyway, I don't know how, I can't remember exactly how it came about, but the Scottish officer was sought out to her, said, come over here. She very intrepidly but warily kind of did, and struck up a conversation. She didn't say that they'd had an actual affair, because he was old enough to be her father, she said. That means nothing. Seriously, means nothing. But she said he took a shine to her and taught her to speak and read and write in English. And, you know, the comical thing about that is, right up until the day she died, she did have a few words that she pronounced in a kind of a Scottish way. I'd sort of look at her funny sometimes. Like, where'd you get that from? And now we know. And now we know. But she said, well, she said, you know, that he'd been a gentleman and hadn't done anything sexually inappropriate with her, just for some peculiar reason took a shine to her, took her under his wing, and afforded her a fair bit of protection from all his men. Wasn't that sweet? Post-war Germany, where the women were, you know, bought and sold for a pair of silk stockings and a bar of chocolate, or raped every which way Sunday. So there is that. Horrific, but what happens with soldiers in wartime, and sailors in wartime, and, you know, air personnel in wartime. War is hell, people of Earth. Oh, war is hell. Anyway, where were we? The British frivol. I guess when you think about it, some, you know, I can't remember what his rank was actually, that Scotsman, but some soldier whistling out to you, you know, and you mind going about your business, you just kick the ball back to them just to be polite, you know, be a good sport, let them continue on with their game. Next thing you know, he's tucked you under his wing and taught you English. I mean, it is a bit frivolous, isn't it? It is a rather British, frivolous thing to do. I suspect she left out the juicy bits, because I was quite young when she told me that story. I suspect, with hindsight 2020, there was a bit more than English teaching going on. You understand? By the gods. Anyway, that's because the nature of my mother the beast. You understand? And the nature of men. You understand? And there was a lot of co-understanding going on, I would suspect. Frivolous British, tempestuous Germans, and post-war Nazi Germany, where everyone had shortages of food and were beaten down and hungry, and bombed out and had no future that they could perceive at the time. Oh, the things you could do to a young girl to take advantage. The mind boggles. Anyway, we shan't think about that, because it's all too ghastly. Ashenden was perplexed. Holzminden had never set foot in that hotel before, and it was unlikely that he had done so now without good reason. Ashenden asked himself whether this event had anything to do with the unusual presence in the dining room of Prince Ali. At that juncture, it was imprudent to ascribe any occurrence, however accidental it looked, to the hazard of coincidence. Prince Ali was an Egyptian, a near relation of the Khedive, who had fled his country when the Khedive was deposed. He was a bitter enemy of the English and was known to be actively engaged in stirring up trouble in Egypt. The week before, Khedive, in great secrecy, had passed 3 days at the hotel, and the pair of them had held constant meetings in the prince's apartments. He was a little fat man with a heavy black moustache. He was living with his 2 daughters and a certain Pasha, Mustafa by name, who was his secretary and managed his affairs. The 4 of them were now dining together. They drank a great deal of champagne, but sat in a stolid silence. The 2 princesses were emancipated young women who spent their nights dancing in restaurants with the bloods of Geneva. What fun! They were short and stout, with fine black eyes and heavy, sallow faces. And they were dressed with a rich loudness that suggested the fish market at Cairo rather than the Rue de la Paix. Oh, he's vicious, isn't he? He's rather vicious. His Highness usually ate upstairs, but the princesses dined every evening in the public dining room. They were chaperoned vaguely by a little old woman, a Miss King, who had been their governess, but she sat at a table by herself, and they appeared to pay no attention to her. Once Ashenden, going along a corridor, had come upon the elder of the 2 fat princesses, berating the governess in French with a violence that took his breath away. She was shouting at the top of her voice and suddenly smacked the old woman's face. When she caught sight of Ashenden, she gave him a furious look and, flinging into her room, slammed the door. He walked on as though he had noticed nothing. On his arrival, Ashenden had tried to scrape acquaintance with Miss King, but she had received his advances not merely with frigidity, but with churlishness. He had begun by taking off his hat when he met her, and she had given him a stiff bow. Then he had addressed her, and she had answered with such brevity that it was evident that she wished to have nothing much to do with him. But it was not his business to be discouraged. So, with what assurance he could muster, he took the first opportunity to enter into conversation with her. She drew herself up and said in French, but with an English accent, "I don't wish to make acquaintance with strangers." She turned her back on him, and next time he saw her, cut him dead. She was a tiny woman, just a few little bones and bag of wrinkled skin, and her face was deeply furrowed. It was obvious that she wore a wig. It was of a mousy brown, very elaborate, and not always set quite straight, and she was heavily made up, with great patches of scarlet on her withered cheeks. Oh, my boys are here. I'm just going to run out and give them some food. Especially cold today. Just a moment. Right, boys. Look at you, Kimmy. The lorikeets are here. The lorikeets are here, little boy. Where are they now? Did they come back? Oh, well, they'll come back when they realise there's food there. Pardon me. Right, as you can see, I've decided to feed them after all, which is going to be an added expense, but what the hell? In for a penny, in for a pound. And the gods are always kind to me, so I'm sure we can manage it. Right, now where were we? Describing Miss King. Right. She was heavily made up with great patches of scarlet on her withered cheeks and brilliantly red lips. She dressed fantastically in gay clothes that looked as though they had been bought higgledy-piggledy from an old clothes shop, and in the daytime she wore enormous, extravagantly girlish hats. She tripped along in very small, sharp, smart shoes with very high heels. Ah, I used to love to wear high heels. Let's check if my boys are back. No. Oh, looks like I was too late pushing the food off. They've gone off in a hump. Oh, well, anyway, next time they'll get it. Her appearance was so grotesque that it created consternation rather than amusement. People turned in the street and stared at her with open mouths. I hate people who do that. It's rude. Anyway, Ashenden was told that Miss King had not been to England since she was first engaged as governess of the prince's mother, and she could not but be amazed to think of all she must have seen during those long years in the harems of Cairo. It was impossible to guess how old she was. How many of those short Eastern lives must have run their course under her eyes, and what dark secrets must she have known? Ashenden wondered where she came from. An exile from her own country for so long, she must possess in it neither family nor friends. He knew that her sentiments were anti-English, and if she had answered him so rudely, He surmised that she had been told to be on her guard against him. She never spoke anything but French. Ashendon wondered what it was she thought of as she sat there at luncheon and dinner by herself. He wondered if ever she read. After meals she went straight upstairs and was never seen in the public sitting rooms. He wondered what she thought of those two emancipated princesses who wore garish frocks and danced with strange men in second-rate cafes. But when Miss King passed him on her way out of the dining room, it seemed to Ashendon that her mask of a face scowled. She appeared actively to dislike him. Her gaze met his, and the pair of them looked at one another for a moment. He imagined that she tried to put into her stare an unspoken insult. It would have been pleasantly absurd in that painted, withered visage if it had not been, for some reason, rather oddly pathetic. Ooh, what a bitch he truly is. Well done, though. But now, the Baroness de Higgins, having finished her dinner, gathered up her handkerchief and her bag, and with waiters bowing on either side, sailed down the spacious room. She stopped at Ashendon's table. She looked magnificent. I'm so glad you can play bridge tonight, she said in perfect English, with no more than a trace of a German accent. Will you come to my sitting room when you are ready and have your coffee? What a lovely dress, said Ashendon. It is frightful. I have nothing to wear. I don't know what I shall do now that I cannot go to Paris. Those horrible Prussians. And her eyes grew guttural as she raised her voice. Oh, why did they want to drag my poor country into this terrible war? She gave a sigh and a flashing smile and sailed on. Ashendon was among the last to finish. Stop it, Spirit, that's hilarious. He said they've all gone hard, Tanya Aarons, whoever that entity that just popped in is. Off you go, don't interrupt my stories. And Ashendon was among the last to finish, and when he left the dining room, it was almost empty. As he walked past Count Holzminden, Ashendon, feeling very gay, hazarded the shadow of a wink. The German agent could not be quite sure of it, and if he suspected, it might rack his brains to discover what mystery it portended. Ashendon walked up to the second floor and knocked at the Baroness's door. Entrez, entrez, she said, and flung it open. She shook both his hands with cordiality and drew him into the room. He saw that the two persons who were to make the four had already arrived. They were Prince Ali and his secretary. Ashendon was astounded. Allow me to introduce Mr. Ashendon to your Highness, said the Baroness, speaking in her fluent French. Ashington bowed and took the proffered hand. The prince gave him a quick look, but did not speak. Madame de Higgins went on. I do not know if you have met the Pasha. I am delighted to make your acquaintance, Mr. Ashington, said the prince's secretary, warmly shaking his hand. Our beautiful Baroness has talked to us of your bridge, and His Highness is devoted to the game. N'est-ce pas, Altesse? Oui, oui, said the prince. Mustafa Pasha was a huge, fat fellow of 45, perhaps, with large mobile eyes and a big black moustache. He wore a dinner jacket with a large diamond in his shirt front and the tabouche of his country. He was exceedingly voluble. Sorry, itches everywhere all of a sudden. He was exceedingly voluble, and the words tumbled out of his mouth tumultuously, like marbles out of a bag. He took pains to be extremely civil to Ashington. The prince sat in silence, looking at Ashington quietly from under his heavy eyelids. He seemed shy. I have not seen you at the club, monsieur, said the Pasha. Do you not like baccarat? I play, but seldom. The Baroness, who has read everything, tells me that you are a remarkable writer. Unfortunately, I do not read English. The Baroness paid Ashington some very fulsome compliments, to which he listened with a proper and grateful politeness, and then, having provided her guests with coffee and liqueurs, she produced the cards. Ashington could not but wonder why he had been asked to play. He had, he flattered himself, few illusions about himself, and so far as bridge was concerned, none. He knew that he was a good player of the second class, but he had played often enough with the best players in the world to know that he was not in the same street with them. The game played now was contract, with which he was not very familiar, and the stakes were high, but the game was obviously but a pretext, and Ashington had no notion what other game was being played under the rose. It might be that, knowing he was a British agent, the prince and his secretary had desired to see him in order to find out what sort of person he was. Ashington had felt for a day or two that something was in the air, and this meeting confirmed his suspicions. But he had not the faintest notion of what nature this something was. His spies had told him of late nothing that signified. He was now persuaded that he owed that visit of the Swiss police to the kindly intervention of the Baroness, and it looked as though the bridge party had been arranged when it was discovered that the detectives had been able to do nothing. The notion was mysterious, but diverting, and as Ashington played one rubber after another, joining in the incessant conversation, he watched what was said by himself no less closely than what was said by the others. The war was spoken of a good deal, and the Baroness and the Pasha expressed very anti-German sentiments. The Baroness's heart was in England, whence her family, the stable boy from Yorkshire, had sprung, and the Pasha looked upon Paris as his spiritual home. When the Pasha talked of Montmartre and its life by night, the prince was roused from his silence. "C'est une bien belle ville, Paris," he said. That means it's a very beautiful town, Paris. The prince has a beautiful apartment there, said his secretary, with beautiful pictures and life-sized statues. Ashenden explained that he had the greatest sympathy for the national aspirations of Egypt, and that he looked upon Vienna as the most pleasing capital in Europe. He was as friendly to them as they were to him. But if they were under the impression that they would get any information out of him that they had not already seen in the Swiss papers, he had a notion that they were mistaken. At one moment he had a suspicion that he was being sounded upon the possibility of selling himself. It was done so discreetly that he could not be quite sure. But he had a feeling that a suggestion floated in the air that a clever writer could do his country a good turn and make a vast amount of money for himself if he cared to enter into an arrangement that would bring to a troubled world the peace that every humane man must so sincerely desire. It was plain that nothing very much would be said that first evening, but Ashenden, as evasively as he could, more by general amiability than by words, tried to indicate that he was willing to hear more of the subject. While he talked with the Pasha and the beautiful Austrian, he was more conscious that the watchful eyes of Prince Ali were upon him, and had an uneasy suspicion that they read too much of his thoughts. He felt rather than knew that the prince was an able and astute man. It was possible that after he left them, the prince would tell the other two that they were wasting their time and there was nothing to be done with Ashenden. Soon after midnight, a rubber having been finished, the prince rose from the table. "It is getting late," he said, "and Mr. Ashenden has doubtless much to do tomorrow. We must not keep him up." Ashenden looked upon this as a signal to take himself off. He left the three together to discuss the situation and retired, not a little mystified. He could only trust that they were no less puzzled than he. When he got to his room, he suddenly realized that he was dog-tired. He could hardly keep his eyes open while he undressed, and the moment he flung himself into bed, he fell asleep. He would have sworn that he had not been asleep 5 minutes when he was dragged back to wakefulness by a knocking at the door. He listened for a moment. "Who is it?" "It's the maid. Open. I have something to say to you." Cursing, Ashenden turned on his light, ran a hand through his thinning and rumpled hair, for, like Julius Caesar, he disliked exposing an unbecoming baldness, and unlocked and opened the door. Outside it stood a tousled Swiss maid. She wore no apron and looked as though she had thrown on her clothes in a hurry. The old English lady, the governess of the Egyptian princesses, is dying, and she wants to see you. Me? Said Ashenden. It's impossible. I don't know her. She was all right this evening. He was confused and spoke his thoughts as they came to him. She asks for you. The doctor says, will you come? She cannot last much longer. It must be a mistake. She can't want me. She said your name and the number of your room. She says, quick, quick. Ashenden shrugged his shoulders. He went back into his room to put on slippers and a dressing gown, and as an afterthought, dropped a small revolver into his pocket. Ashenden believed much more in his acuteness than in a firearm, which is apt to go off at the wrong time and make a noise. But there are moments when it gives you confidence to feel your fingers round its butt, and this sudden summons seemed to him exceedingly mysterious. It was ridiculous to suppose that those two cordial, stout Egyptian gentlemen were laying some sort of trap for him, but in the work upon which Ashenden was engaged, the dullness of routine was apt now and again to slip quite shamelessly into the melodrama of the 60s. Just as passion will make use brazenly of the hackneyed phrase, so will chance show itself insensitive to the triteness of the literary convention. Miss King's room was 2 floors higher than Ashenden's, and as he accompanied the chambermaid along the corridor and up the stairs, he asked her what was the matter with the old governess. She was flurried and stupid. I think she has had a stroke. I don't know. The night porter woke me and said Monsieur Bridet wanted me to get up at once. Monsieur Bridet was the assistant manager. What is the time? Asked Ashenden. It must be 3 o'clock. Watching 3 little boys whipping each other with branches of leaves. Something from out of a bacchanalian feast, are we right? Ah, well, not my little monkeys, not my little circus. I have to laugh. They arrived at Miss King's door, and the maid knocked. It was opened by Monsieur Bridet. He had evidently been roused from his sleep. He wore slippers on his bare feet, grey trousers and a frock coat over his pyjamas. He looked absurd. His hair, as a rule plastered neatly on his head, stood on end. He was extremely apologetic. 1,000 excuses for disturbing you, Monsieur Ashenden, but she kept asking for you, and the doctor said you should be sent for. It doesn't matter at all. Ashenden walked in. It was a small back room and all the lights were on. The windows were closed and the curtains drawn. It was intensely hot. The doctor, a bearded, grizzled Swiss, was standing at the bedside. Monsieur Bridet, notwithstanding his costume and his evident harassment, found in himself the presence of mind to remain the attentive manager, and with ceremony effected the proper introduction. "This is Mr. Ashenden, for whom Miss King has been asking, Dr. Arbos of the Faculty of Medicine of Geneva." Without a word, the doctor pointed to the bed. On it lay Miss King. It gave Ashenden a shock to look at her. She wore a large white cotton nightcap. On entering, Ashenden had noticed the brown wig on a stand on the dressing table, tied under the chin, and a white voluminous nightdress that came high up in the neck. Nightcap and nightdress belonged to a past age and reminded you of Cruikshank's illustrations to the novels of Charles Dickens. Her face was greasy still with the cream she had used before going to bed to remove her makeup, but she had removed it summarily, and there were streaks of black on her eyebrows and of red on her cheeks. She looked very small, lying in the bed, no larger than a child, and immensely old. She must be well over 80, thought Ashenden. She did not look human, but like a doll, the caricature of an old witch that an ironic toy maker had amused himself with modelling. Just going to shut the boys in. Here we go, my handsome boy. You're so beautiful. Do you know how beautiful you are? And you, mister. Yes, you can go in now. That's it. Good lad. Good lad. Yes. I'll put the towels and blankets over soon when it gets dark. Oh. She lay perfectly still on her back, the tiny little body hardly marked under the flatness of the blanket. Her face even smaller than usual because she had removed her teeth. Always a sign that someone's about to die. The dentist told me that in the old people's homes. She used to work at the old people's home. She said she always knew when one of the residents was about to die, they would suddenly refuse to wear their teeth and refuse to eat. Just a little segue there, but it's interesting. Always interested me, that. And you would have thought she was dead, but for the black eyes, strangely large in the shrunken mask that stared unblinkingly. Ashenden thought their expression changed when she saw him. "Well, Miss King, I'm sorry to see you like this," he said, with forced cheerfulness. "She cannot speak," said the doctor. "She had another little stroke when the maid went to fetch you. I have just given her an injection. She may partly recover the use of her tongue in a little while. She has something to say to you." "I will gladly wait," said Ashenden. He fancied that in those dark eyes he saw a look of relief. For a moment or two, the four of them stood round the bed and stared at the dying woman. Well, if there is nothing I can do, I may just as well go back to bed, said Monsieur Bridet then. Allez, mon ami, said the doctor. You can do nothing. Monsieur Bridet turned to Ashendon. May I have a word with you? He asked. Certainly. The doctor noticed a sudden fear in Miss King's eyes. Do not be alarmed, he said kindly. Monsieur Ashendon is not going. He will stay as long as you wish. The assistant manager took Ashendon to the door and partly closed it, so that those within should not hear his undertones. I can count on your discretion, Monsieur Ashendon, can I not? It is a very disagreeable thing to have anyone die in a hotel. The other guests do not like it, and we must do all we can to prevent their knowing. I shall have the body removed the first possible moment, and I shall be extremely obliged if you will not say that there has been a death. You can have every confidence in me, said Ashendon. It is very unfortunate that the manager should be away for the night. I am afraid he will be exceedingly displeased. Of course, if it had been possible, I would have sent for an ambulance and had her taken to the hospital, but the doctor said she might die before we got her downstairs and absolutely refused to let me. It is not my fault if she dies in the hotel. Death so often chooses its moments without consideration, murmured Ashendon. After all, she is an old woman. She should have died years ago. What did this Egyptian prince want to have a governess of that age for? He ought to have sent her back to her own country. These Orientals, they are always giving trouble. Where is the prince now? Asked Ashendon. She has been in his service for many years. Ought you not to wake him? He is not in the hotel. He went out with his secretary. He may be playing baccarat. I do not know. Anyhow, I cannot send all over Geneva to find him. And the princesses? They have not come in. They seldom return to the hotel till dawn. They are mad about dancing. I do not know where they are. In any case, they would not thank me for dragging them away from their diversions because their governess has had a stroke. I know what they are. The night porter will tell them when they arrive, and then they can please themselves. She does not want them. When the night porter fetched me and I went into her room, I asked where His Highness was, and she cried with all her strength, "No, no." She could talk then? Yes, after a fashion, but the thing that surprised me was that she spoke in English. She always insisted on talking French. You know, she hated the English. What did she want with me? That I cannot tell you. She said she had something that she must say to you at once. It is funny. She knew the number of your room. At first, when she asked for you, I would not let them send. I cannot have my clients disturbed in the middle of the night because a crazy old woman asks for them. You have the right to your sleep, I imagine. But when the doctor came, he insisted. She gave us no peace, and when I said she must wait till morning, she cried. Ashendon looked at the assistant manager. He seemed to find nothing at all touching in the scene he related. The doctor asked who you were, and when I told him, he said that perhaps she wished to see you because you were a compatriot. Perhaps, said Ashenden, dryly. Well, I shall try to get a little sleep. I shall give the night porter orders to wake me when everything is over. Fortunately, the nights are long now, and if everything goes well, we may be able to get the body away before it is light. Ashenden went back into the room, and immediately the dark eyes of the dying woman fixed upon him. He felt that it was incumbent upon him to say something, but as he spoke he reflected on the foolish way in which one speaks to the sick. I'm afraid you're feeling very ill, Miss King. It seemed to him that a flash of anger crossed her eyes, and Ashenden could not but imagine that she was exasperated by his futile words. You do not mind waiting? Asked the doctor. Of course not. It appeared that the night porter had been roused by the ringing of the telephone from Miss King's room, but on listening could get no one to speak. The bell continued to ring, so he went upstairs and knocked at the door. He entered with his pass key and found Miss King lying on the floor. The telephone had fallen too. It looked as though, feeling ill, she had taken off the receiver to call for help, and then collapsed. The night porter hurried to fetch the assistant manager, and together they had lifted her back into bed. Then the maid was wakened, and the doctor sent for. It gave Ashenden a queer feeling to listen to the doctor giving him these facts in Miss King's hearing. He spoke as though she could not understand his French. He spoke as though she were already dead. People do that, you know, it's so fucking insensitive. Like, have a bit of bloody respect. Then the doctor said, well, there is really nothing more that I can do. It is useless for me to stay. I can be rung up if there is any change. Ashenden, knowing that Miss King might remain in that condition for hours, shrugged his shoulders. Very well. The doctor patted her raddled cheek as though she were a child. You must try to sleep. I will come back in the morning. He packed up the dispatch case in which he had his medical appliances, washed his hands, and shuffled himself into a heavy coat. Ashenden accompanied him to the door, and as he shook hands, the doctor gave his prognosis in a pout of his bearded mouth. Ashenden, coming back, looked at the maid. She sat on the edge of a chair uneasily, as though in the presence of death she feared to presume. Her broad, ugly face was bloated with fatigue. There's no use in your staying up, Ashenden said to her. Why don't you go to bed? Monsieur wouldn't like to remain here alone. Somebody must stay with him. But good heavens, why? You have your day's work to do tomorrow. In any case, I have to get up at 5. Then try to get a little sleep now. You can give me a look in when you get up. Allez. She rose heavily to her feet. As the gentleman wishes, but I will stay very willingly. Ashendon smiled and shook his head. Bonsoir, ma pauvre mademoiselle, said the maid. She went out, and Ashendon was left alone. He sat by the bedside, and again his eyes met Miss King's. It was embarrassing to encounter that unshrinking stare. Don't worry yourself, Miss King. You've had a slight stroke. I'm sure your speech will come back to you in a minute. He felt certain then that he saw in those dark eyes a desperate effort to speak. He could not be mistaken. The mind was shaken by desire, but the paralyzed body was incapable of obedience. For her disappointment expressed itself quite plainly. Tears came to her eyes and ran down her cheeks. Ashendon took out his handkerchief and dried them. Don't distress yourself, Miss King. Have a little patience, and I'm sure you'll be able to say anything you want. He did not know if it was his fancy that he read in her eyes now the despairing thought that she had not the time to wait. Perhaps it was only that he ascribed to her the notions that came to himself. On the dressing table were the governess's poor little toilet things, silver-backed embossed brushes and a silver mirror. In a corner stood a shabby black trunk, and on the top of the wardrobe a large hat box in shiny leather. It all looked poor and mean in that trim hotel room with its sweet and highly varnished rosewood. The glare was intolerable. Wouldn't you be more comfortable if I turned out some of the lights? Asked Ashendon. He put out all the lamps but the one by the bedside, and then sat down again. He had a longing to smoke. Once more his eyes were held by those other eyes, in which was all that remained alive of that old woman. He felt certain that she had something that she wanted urgently to say to him. But what was it? What was it? Perhaps she had asked him only because, feeling death near, she had had a sudden yearning. She, the exile of so many years, to die with someone of her own people, so long forgotten, by her side. That was what the doctor thought. But why should she have sent for him? There were other English people in the hotel. There was an old pair, a retired Indian civilian and his wife, to whom it seemed more natural that she should turn. No one could be more of a stranger to her than Ashendon. Have you got something to say to me, Miss King? He tried to read an answer in her eyes. They continued to stare at him meaningfully, but what the meaning was, he had no notion. Don't be afraid. I shall go. I will stay as long as you want me. Nothing. The black eyes, and as he looked at them, they seemed to glow mysteriously as though there were fire behind them. The eyes continued to hold him with that insistent stare. Then Ashenden asked himself if she had sent for him because she knew that he was a British agent. Was it possible that at that last moment she had had some unexpected revulsion of feeling from everything that had signified to her for so many years? Perhaps at the moment of death, a love for her country, a love that had been dead for half a century, awakened again in her. I'm silly to fancy these idiotic things, thought Ashenden. It's cheap and tawdry fiction. And she had been seized with a desire to do something for what was, after all, her own. No one was quite himself just then, and patriotism in peacetime an attitude best left to politicians, publicists and fools. But in the dark days of war and emotion that can wring the heartstrings, patriotism made one do odd things, like taking home a New Zealand naval petty officer and entertaining him patriotically. You understand? Oh well, what fun. Don't make a habit of that, you must understand, but baby. Anyway, what can I say? It was curious that she had been unwilling to see the prince and his daughters. Did she, on a sudden, hate them? Did she feel herself a traitor on their account, and now, at the last hour, wish to make amends? It's all very improbable. She's just a silly old maid who ought to have died years ago. But you couldn't ignore the improbable. Ashenden, his common sense protesting, became strangely convinced that she had some secret that she wished to impart to him. She had sent for him knowing who he was because he could make use of it. She was dying and feared nothing. But was it really important? Ashenden leaned forward, trying more eagerly to read what her eyes had to say. Perhaps it was only some trivial thing that was important only in her addled old brain. Ashenden was sick of the people who saw spies in every inoffensive passerby and plots in the most innocent combination of circumstances. It was 100 to 1 that if Miss King recovered her speech, she would tell him something that could be of no use to anybody. But how much must that old woman know? With her sharp eyes and sharp ears, she must have had the chance to discover matters that were closely hidden from persons that seemed less insignificant. Ashenden thought again how he had the impression that something of real consequence was being prepared round about him. It was curious that Holzminden should have come to the hotel that day. And why had Prince Ali and the Pasha, those wild gamblers, wasted an evening in playing contract bridge with him? It might be that some new plan was in question. It might be that the very greatest affairs were afoot, and perhaps what the old woman had to say might make all the difference in the world. It might mean defeat or victory. It might mean anything. And there she lay, powerless to speak. For a long time, Ashendon stared at her in silence. "Has it got anything to do with the war, Miss King?" he said on a sudden, loudly. Something passed through her eyes, and a tremor shot across her little old face. It was a distinct movement. Something strange and horrible was happening, and Ashendon held his breath. The tiny, frail body was suddenly convulsed, and that old woman, as though by a final desperate effort of will, raised herself up on the bed. Ashendon sprang forward to support her. "England," she said, just that one word in a harsh, cracked voice, and fell back in his arms. When he laid her down on the pillow, he saw that she was dead. The end. Right. I shall be back tomorrow. I could continue, I suppose, but no. I'll save it till tomorrow. The last story in this book, titled The Hairless Mexican. That should be a treat, shouldn't it? I do love Mexico and Mexicans. Fiery and colourful and ebullient and sometimes very serious people, depending on personalities, you understand. But Viva Mexico, another country I'll probably never get to see before I die. C'est la vie, babies. Or should I say, hasta mañana, because one should never give up hope. Anyway, on that note, I bid you good evening. Not sure what the time is, but blessed be from sacred space, and patriotism is a thing, people of Earth. And I bid you goodbye for now.